Hi folks, it's been a long time since I've made a video, and today's video is just going to be me talking. There's going to be no production whatsoever, so enjoy that if you can. The thing I want to talk about today is media bias charts. These things are popping up more and more on social media. The most popular one that I see is from a company called Adfontes Media, and I think these things are bullshit. And I frankly think that if you buy into them, you are much dumber than the people who are listening to the Alex Jones resources and things like that, that these charts rightly give a poor rating. Now, my problem with these charts is not that, I'm butthurt over the fact that the organizations I like didn't get a good rating, which I'm sure is going to be the obvious retort from people who buy into these things. No, I think the very idea of trying to assess media bias by quantifying things and placing them on an XY graph, which is quite literally a two-dimensional way of looking at media bias, I think that is so fucking stupid. And it enrages me when people try and act smart by pointing to this thing that I have to say something about it. Okay? And so the first thing I want to say about it is it lacks transparency. All right? The raw data that they compile to make these assessments is not available to the public. You can buy it if you like. You can look at Adfontes' website and their methodology section, and you can find this out. Okay, you can buy the data, the raw data, if you want to find out how up to snuff their process is, which seems a little squirrely, and you would have a conflict of interest if you bought this data. You would probably be less than reliable yourself. That's number one. Number two, in terms of lack of transparency, the algorithm that they use to weight this data is proprietary, meaning you do not have access to it. They consider it a trade secret or whatever. Now, the data they collect is not available. The algorithm they process that data through is proprietary. It's a black box. So you don't have access to the data. You don't know how they actually process this data. And they want to make claims, which they do, that they are transparent, which is bullshit. Okay? That's frustrating. Now, as for the methodology itself, I'm skeptical of the idea that you can get a bunch of people together to make subjective judgments and get an objective assessment out of it. It just seems that just seems like something that people should have learned by now you can't actually do. There's a great documentary on this subject by Adam Curtis called The Trap, where he talks about all the instances where people have done that. Maybe if I want to, I'll talk about that later in this video. But my point is the methodology, to the extent that they make it public and accessible, they do run down some of how they make their assessments, and I'll give credit where credit is due. Some of the things they say about assessing media are good advice. They're things that myself and probably most educated and thoughtful readers of news do when they assess media. But there are some other problems with their methodology. One of the big ones is they don't rate a single news story across multiple sources. They kind of just pick a news site and then they'll, decide to, in a seemingly random way. I don't know. Again, lack of transparency. In a seemingly random way, they'll make assessments on different articles. So that seems like a problem. That would seem like a very controlled way to make an assessment of media bias would be by looking at the way a story is covered in different sources, but they don't do that. Frustrating. All right, I'm very excited out of the gate here. Hopefully I'll cool out a little bit now that I've gotten that off my chest. Now, some other things, okay? Political bias. They, reduce it to one axis. This chart is already overly simplified by being literally two-dimensional. But that means that political bias is reduced to one dimension. This creates all sorts of weird distortions where you have things that are seemingly liberal end up to the left of more left-wing sources. It's squirrely. It really is. But that's not really the main problem with this thing. The main problem with this thing, as I said earlier, is that you're trying to deal with something that requires a quantitative look. I'm sorry, you're trying to deal with something that requires qualitative analysis in a quantitative way. You know, if I look at the New York Times, which they give a 45 reliability rating and a 5.5 skewing to the left, doesn't tell me anything about the New York Times. It doesn't tell me about how they cover labor issues or coups in Latin America, or what types of experts they refer to, or how they will shade a seemingly fact, only fully fact-based news story in different ways. It doesn't talk about, the model of media bias analysis that I like. Although it's dated, it still works on many levels. It doesn't talk about manufacturing consent the way that Chomsky and Herman in that book talk about the different filters, that news gets filtered through. If I can remember them off the top of my head, it's who owns the company, where do they get their funding from, who are these supposed experts that they have on, who in the terms of these centrist publications that Ad Fontes Media ranks very highly are military and government officials who are not biased at all. Who do they, it doesn't talk about the flack that media corporations get. If you run a story, you're going to get flack from this group and that group. And these are filters that things get run through. And the last filter that they put is anti-communism, which might seem a little outdated, but to anybody who followed, I don't know, how Bernie Sanders was treated, and he was just a social democrat, or anyone who followed how the coup in Bolivia was covered in late 2019, you're going to know that that the most centrist, reliable publications don't necessarily lack a sort of bias. Now, I know how Ad Fontes would respond to this. The woman who runs it, Vanessa Otero, is a patent attorney. Seems like a smart person, obviously liberal, because you're looking at this chart and it's obviously the chart that comes from the mind of a liberal. I'm not saying that just because I don't like it or whatever, but if I made a chart and all the highly reliable sources were in the upper left corner, you wouldn't buy it. You'd say, Greg, you're obviously biased. Your own biases are sneaking into this. And I would say, oh no, of course not. Would you believe me? Come on, man. Come on. So, but I know how she would respond to me saying this isn't a good understanding of reliability or political bias. She would say, oh, well, yeah, of course it's not that simple. She would put forth this chart, which puts a very simple way of looking at media bias out there. And but when questioned on it, or preemptively actually, she's bright enough to realize that people are going to have this objection. She'll say, oh, well, yeah, of course it's more complicated than that. There's other factors here. Now, this is one of my favorite rhetorical little games that I can spot. I have a penchant for spotting it. Maybe an obsession. Maybe I see it where it's not there. But to me, this looks like what we call the Mott and Bailey defense. It works like this. You put forth a position that is hard to defend. The Bailey. And yeah, so in this case, the Bailey is this chart presents media bias. And then when you get called on that, or you want to try and, not have to defend that outrageous claim when you look at this chart and it gets things crazy wrong, you retreat to the Mott, which is easier to defend. And you say, whoa, no, of course it's more complicated than that. There's all these factors and this to take care of. Well, okay, that's fine, but you're selling this chart. So which one is it? Is it more complicated than that? Or is it as simple as this chart that you put out there? It's really frustrating when people try and bring this thing and put this thing in my face. And in order to shut down any dissent from things that are literally inside a fucking bubble on the chart. They're in a bubble. They're in a bubble. Okay? And then you will get people saying, well, you're in a bubble because you only read these sources. And it's, projection's a hell of a drug, man. It's frustrating. It's frustrating. I mean, when you see something like Quillette get a higher reliability rating than like Current Affairs and Jacobin and, lots of sources I like, but then also get higher reliability rating than like CNN and MSNBC, sources I don't like, but I kind of would trust a little bit more than Quillette. And I say this because Quillette not only regularly traffics in, discredited race science, but last year their fact checking sucks so bad that they got taken in by a hoax, by somebody claiming that they were a blue collar worker who went to a DSA meeting and didn't like what they saw and wrote a piece that looked exactly like you would expect from someone trying to put one over on Quillette. Now again, Mott and Bailey. So if you're going to look at that and say, oh, well, the algorithm's not perfect. Maybe we need to tweak it a bit. This doesn't fully represent anything. Well, okay, well, fine. What does it represent? Like you can't have it both ways. You can't play that Mott and Bailey game forever. You either have to say this represents media bias, or no, we're going to abandon this chart because it doesn't represent media bias. You can't put it out there as an accurate representation when it suits you and then retreat to the Mott whenever it doesn't. It's fucking bullshit, okay? It's really annoying. And so this is troubling, okay? And it's very much this liberal idea that, oh, well, this is one of the big problems we need to solve in the world right now. It's fake news. And yeah, you know what? There's a lot of bullshit. There's always a lot of bullshit out there. That's always something you're going to have to deal with. But the idea that this is the biggest problem or that this is the way to deal with it, I mean, when the centrist organizations don't cover the news properly and you need to go for analysis other places, and you can't just point a finger at those other outlets as slanted when oh my god. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about here. All right. I could probably go on a bunch of tangents on this thing, but I just want to get this out quick because this is just this is like a fucking kidney stone I'm trying to pass, this bullshit. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is where this project is going. This person who runs it seems like a nice person. I don't want to offend her. She really does, okay? But this seems like a fucking grift to me. Period. They're looking for investors and they're getting investors, and they are running as not a B Corp, but one of those. So they seem to have a social mission, and you know what? Good for them. A salute. But looking at how we have dealt in the last 10 plus years with the way data has been manipulated and used, I don't like where they are taking this thing. It's, we look at the way all these companies control our data and use it to hem us in more and more and get us to buy shit and get to manipulate all the information around us. And this doesn't seem like a solution to that problem. This seems like adding to it. They're not only producing this chart, but they're producing educational materials for schools, which, quite frankly, uh, a lot of this stuff is probably already in a textbook and is cheaper. Period. And it doesn't even cover the biases of the centrist media. I mean, the media that Chomsky and Herman thought was the media you most needed to look at skeptically is the very media that they're saying is most reliable. Now, I'm sympathetic to that somewhat because yeah, there's a lot of bullshit out there. I get it. And yeah, you should, yeah, but this obscures the way people look at news, and as does the reliability axis of their chart. Which, by the way, puts the New York Times in most reliable, but is that only counting the news coverage, or does that also count the editorial? Because it seems like those are two different things, and you've conflated them and lumped them together. Problem. Where was I? Yeah, so I don't like where they're going with this. They're not only selling educational materials, but they're selling their model to marketers and publishers. Now, imagine where that will go. You're going to get marketers passing judgment on publications based on this really bad chart. And you're going to get publishers trying to conform to it and conform to a very bad model. And probably you'll get some of them trying to game the system. That'll not only create all sorts of distortions, they'll probably create some really shitty writing and standards that journalists and writers who are already overburdened with this bullshit are going to have to deal with. I don't like it. I mean, we've seen where these types of things have gone. I mean, I mentioned Adam Curtis's The Trap earlier, but when you look at John Nash, for example, who created the game theory, which ran the madness behind the Cold War. When you look at him, you look at the way he did the way his literally schizophrenic ideas permeated out into our military strategy, and how that seemed very rational to everybody at the time. There's a problem. When you look at the type of managerial system of quotas and metrics that have popped up over the last 30 years, that's a problem. When you get people more worried about quotas than the actual real issues at hand, that's a problem. I worked in a library. I mean, you would find a book that was a classic or a very important piece of nonfiction, and it would get thrown out because it had only circulated once or twice in the last year, and that just wasn't enough to meet certain standards. And that goes against the actual mission of an organization. And when you create these arbitrary these arbitrary metrics, that's what it does. It distorts things. It doesn't help things. And we're not numbers. You need to look at these things qualitatively. If you're just trying to assign a number to things, you're going to miss a lot. You're going to miss the biases in these organizations that they put in this chart as the most reliable and the least biased. They have Voice of America, which is literally a fucking propaganda arm of the United States government. Okay, yeah, and maybe it only reports so-called facts. Maybe it sits pretty much in the center of the American political spectrum. But that completely erases the biases it does have, and it makes the chart basically fucking useless. Yeah, I can't even believe when people show this chart to me. It is so fucking dumb. It boggles the mind. So I don't even know if I have any more for you today, folks. I can't even. I probably had things I wanted to say here, but I'm glad I did this because I just needed to get this off my chest. It's so annoying. Um, this whole thing, by the way, is kind of a subtweet. Unfortunately, I got into an argument with somebody on Twitter who I like. Nice guy, good music YouTuber, does semi-political stuff. Agree with him. For some reason, I commented on something he did, and I don't know why I shouldn't have, whatever. He's liberal, and I probably rubbed him the wrong way, and he rubbed me the wrong way, or whatever. But he brought up the media bias chart, and it drove me crazy. It drove me crazy. So I had to get this off my chest. Like, share, and subscribe. I got a Patreon, links in the description, all that good stuff. Yeah, folks, be well. Stay safe. Lights at the end of the tunnel with this quarantine shit. Remember, all generalizations are stupid, so never speak in absolutes. Rebel Base.